So, with Wales finishing bottom of the Six Nations table, it's easy for us Welsh fans to feel a bit pessimistic, but I'm here to tell you that it's actually a little bit better than it looks from the outside. My name's Christian, and this is the Welsh Sports Podcast. So in this video, what I'll be doing is a quick review of the games of the Six Nations, and then I'll be summarising my thoughts, looking at some statistics, some pros and cons, and hopefully making us feel a little bit better on how Wales finished up in the tournament. Now, first of all, when the squad was announced, I must admit I was, although a bit nervous because it was clearly just a team full of youngsters and not a lot of experience and probably not many world-class or real top quality players. I was actually excited because it was a bit of a dawn of a new era. We'd sort of scraped through the last Six Nations and then we had a decent World Cup, some players coming to the fore and performing. Unfortunately, players like Jack Morgan and Debbie Lake were unavailable, so we were forcing to put some young players in, especially in the front row with Thomas Francis missing out, and there was quite a lot of pessimism, but I myself was quite excited to see what these players could do. So as we headed into the Scotland game, we didn't really know what sort of side he was going to pick. He sort of went for, in my opinion, like a middling side. He didn't really go all out with the youngsters, but he didn't go full-on veteran, the strongest team that I think he could have. Players like, maybe no disrespect, but James Botham, I don't think he's an international player. He seemed like he was more of just a sturdy regional player who he was plugging in just to make like the team at a decent standard. Same goes for Leon Brown. I think there is some upside with Leon Brown, but he can't stay fit, and to be honest, I've never really seen that much from him. But anyway, we went into the Scotland game and it was absolutely horrendous. The first half was just a bit of a disgrace, to be honest. There was no attack, no one was really doing anything, and we were a little bit shell-shocked. He did a whole raft of changes in the second half, brought some players on like Thomas Williams, Alex Mann came on, a few other young players, and they all really made a difference. The likes of Kieran Azarati coming on, and we actually really ended up pushing Scotland, and we probably should have won. So coming out of that game, I must admit I was quite optimistic, along with probably a lot of Welsh supporters, thinking, well, if we play anything like that, then we're going to be able to compete with these teams. So heading into England, even though we were going to Twickenham, and it's not a place where we've been particularly successful recently, although most of us probably weren't expecting a win, we thought there was an opportunity for a win. And Wales performed pretty good in the first half. Ioan Lloyd was forced into 10 due to an injury in the Scotland game for Sam Costello. And although he had one or two moments, I think generally he struggled. And he couldn't really his decision making really let him down. And Wales were leading going into half time, but didn't score in the first half, and eventually England's power and just determination paid, and that was unfortunately another loss, and probably one we could have and should have won, I think, in hindsight, looking back now. And then we moved on to the Ireland game, which nobody expected anything from us. I don't know whether the players even did, but to be fair, the scoreline sort of flatters Ireland, and I think most people would say that. It ended up being 31-7 with them scoring the bonus point right at the death. But although for the large part of the first half we weren't in the game, once we came into the game, we put them under a bit of pressure. And though we never looked like we were going to win the game probably, but we sort of put them under a bit more pressure than we was expecting. Wainwright's in my opinion, scored, and they give it as held up, and that would have put a bit more gloss on things, and it would have kept the momentum for us. During this time, I think we started finding some of the youngsters were able to play at this standard. The likes of Cam Winnett, who had come in, was really decent, and Alex Mann as well, making an impression, scoring against Scotland and England as well. So we were thinking, well, France was the next game, and they were playing poorly for their standards at least, and I myself thought we were going to win that game, and we went into it and we competed for about an hour, and then, as everyone can probably remember because it was fairly recent, he made a raft of changes. The half-backs got changed and we just lost any momentum. Generally we got bullied physically, same as in the Island game, and left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and I was quite then pessimistic after that, and I was quite disappointed after that, and I took a bit of flack in my video because of how disappointed and down I was. A few people said I was a negative typical Welsh fan, so which I disagree with, to be honest. But anyway, moving on for that game then, we had the crunch match against Italy. I was a little bit annoyed at Warren Gatland's comments in the week saying that it's not a must-win, because I think it was a must-win. Like I said at the beginning, we hadn't won the wooden spoon for over 20 years, and I thought that it should be a non-acceptable for him and his high standards. I think he was trying to maybe take the pressure off the players because they were under an awful lot of pressure, but also we were hearing a lot that this was going to be a good yardstick of where this young squad is in handling the pressure. And it was only a week ago, so most people, I'm not going to go into too much details, but most people can remember that it was just not good enough from start to finish, really. The scrums were an issue throughout the tournament, and they were an issue in this game. The core skills was what I was most annoyed about in this game, the inaccuracies. You can be a small side, which is something you can't really do much about, but just pure handling skills and accuracy and stuff like that, there's no excuse for that. And we ended up losing by 3 points, 24-21. But that scoreline flattered us. Mason Grady scoring right at the end. We put him under a bit of pressure at the end, but it was too late. The game was already lost. So that was a quick roundup of the games. So before I go on to the possibly pros and some of the cons and the issues and what we might see and what we're hoping that will improve over the next couple of years and months, I'll go over some stats which I found interesting. I'll pop them up on the screen too. So as you can see, meters gained there, Cameron Winnett is 4th and Rio Dyer, in fairness, is 6th. That's impressive because Cameron Winnett obviously was, a lot of those are cheap yards where he's returning kicks and stuff like that, but to me that's a measure of how sort of well he reads the game, because he's fielding pretty much all of the kicks for Wales and returning them. And then Rio Dyer, who was just brilliant in attack, and I think this shows that really he's up there with the great attackers in this competition, the Van der Merwes, Peno, Lowe, Montejuani as well. As we go across, we go to tackles made. Dav Jenkins and Tommy Raffel, one tackle between them, 79 for Dav Jenkins, 78 for Tommy Raffel. That's unbelievable. Look at Michele Lamoureux, though. I mean, that's tremendous from the Italian skipper, 103 tackles. And then underneath that, we've got the tackles missed. Interestingly, Rio Dyer, who is someone I had sort of, I didn't criticise him because I think he's had a great tournament, particularly in attack, but his defence had been an issue, and I pointed that out. And then the stats don't lie there. Joint second for most tackles with missed tackles with 15. We move on though. Attacking ruck arrivals. Again, Dav Jenkins and Tommy Raffel battling it out. Dav Jenkins sort of just peaking above everyone else. That is a tremendous stat for pointing out someone's work rate. Look at that, 144 attacking ruck arrivals. That just shows the amount of work he's getting through. One of the top tacklers and the top clearer outer as well for Tommy Raffel. The same thing, just very, very impressive from both these guys. And the same for defensive ruck arrivals for Tommy Raffel, and he is clearly above everyone else there because he was just a constant threat at breakdown time. And then the breakdown steals, Raffel again head and shoulders above everyone else. Double Sam Underhills and Lucchese, who were second. With 8, that tied, I believe it tied John Barclay's record for the most ever turnovers in one Six Nations. So, I mean, how lucky are we that we lose probably one of our few world-class players in Jack Morgan, and then Tommy Raphael comes in and just does an absolute world-class job. I know they're different players, a lot of debate on whether they'll fit in the same team, but that was no one is better than Raphael at the moment at that. I thought this was an interesting one. This is successful penalties. One penalty. There's an interesting stat that's been going around as well about the amount of halves. I think it was 4 halves out of the 5 games that we played where we didn't score a single point, and I think this shows exactly why here. We've had one successful penalty kick, and I think, to my knowledge, that was the only one we went for. We seem to have this obsession with kicking into the corner, which I don't really get what they were getting at with this. This seems like whether it was a captain's decision, I can't imagine that. It must have come from the coaches that when they was in sort of a red zone area, they're going to kick and they're not going to go for points, which I think is absolutely crazy, to be honest. But I think that was a big part of the issue why we were struggling to build any scoreboard pressure, because we just weren't going for penalties, which again I don't understand. This was another actually quite a telling stat. So we're second in carries here for 643, but if we go over to meters gained, we're 5th. So second in the most carries, we're second in the most passes, but we're only gaining the 5th most meters. And that's just, again, that is a damning indictment of the sort of lack of ability to get over the gain line and to actually cause teams any issues. And then it's the same as attack ruck arrivals. We're the highest out of everyone with the highest amount of rucks. So it just shows that it wasn't for a lack of possession or anything like that. It's just we couldn't break anyone down, and that's slightly worrying. So I'm not sure what they can do about this. This is another interesting one, and it all plays into the same thing. Ruck speed. So rucks from 0 to 3 seconds. We're bottom of the entire Six Nations. It's just that, and that is a case in point of why we're not stressing teams. And then rucks 4 to 6 seconds, we're the highest out of everyone. So teams are getting organised because we're not getting in behind them, or we're not getting them moving around. So again, this all plays into the same thing of why we were quite a blunt instrument. And then finally the scrums. The scrums, we were bottom of the win percentage of the Six Nations again. So we're not stressing teams, and then we're not building a particularly good set piece position, because we can just about win half of our scrums, and at the international level, that's just simply not good enough. Now, I know that was a lot of stats, and I do apologise if you turned off because of that. Well, you wouldn't have heard me saying this anyway, but if anyone found it boring. But I just think it was quite important to iterate where we are and the issues we're having, particularly with those gain line issues, and the most carries but just not making any sort of yardage with it, and that's what's worrying. Another thing what is worrying as well, I'll just pop this up, finishing bottom of the Six Nations is, money wise, is we won 1 million. Now I know it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things about not finishing high up in the table. Unless you win it, you clearly get a substantial amount more if you win it. But I think in a country and a union that is struggling money-wise, I think this is like a snowball effect where we continue to lose because we're not funding, and then we're not making better funds. And it's just a strong point, testament to why and how the WRU mismanaged the time when we had that golden generation who was winning stuff and finishing high and competing for Six Nations titles and etc. And how they've wasted that money, because there's obviously a large amount of money there that has been earned over. We had that golden generation of players when Gatland was in his first term, and that money has clearly been wasted by the WRU, and that is a really clear point of the mismanagement that we all know has been going on in the WRU. But all this doom and gloom, and I did say I was going to actually try and make us feel a bit better of where we are at the moment, because there's been a lot of negativity, and rightly so, because we've completely underperformed and it hasn't been good enough, and I've been guilty of being negative on this channel. But I think there's definitely some green shoots, which you probably don't need me to point out, but I'm going to anyway. So we've got 6 new caps, which I believe is a record for the Six Nations, for Wales in the Six Nations anyway. So we've definitely brought new players in. We knew it was going to be a big turnover of players. There was a lot of senior players leaving, and we were going to have to bring new players in. So I'm not saying that these players are necessarily going to be around for the next 10 years, but some players we can look at and certainly say that they've acquitted themselves very well at international rugby. Obviously, the natural one is Cam Winnett. He's been really, really great. I think he's been a very calming influence in that backfield, and other than against Italy where him and Costello run into each other, that he hasn't really made much of a mistake that I can really think about. And you could even argue that wasn't his fault. Surely, if the fullback calls it, then it's the fullback's ball. I don't know, but that's been great, and he's going to continue to improve the more he plays. Like, he's only played like 8 or 9 games for Cardiff, so when you think he's done that, and then he's played a whole Six Nations every minute, and he's been pretty much unflappable and unflawed, that is a cause for positivity, 100%. Then you had the likes of Alex Mann, who's come in at 6, and he's been really good. And all of the talk, like literally everyone who's in the camp, when they talk about players who've impressed them, they all mention Alex Mann and his professionalism and his attitude to training, and just what he brings to the training pitch. And I'm talking coaches, multiple coaches, just when they just bring him up out of nowhere. Gatland's mentioned him a few times. Also, I've heard different players, multiple players, say that they're really impressed with the way he approaches the game and stuff like that. So that's a positive. He is a little bit undersized for 6 at international rugby, but he can definitely put on a couple of kilos, and I think his size, I mean, at the end of the day, he's 22. He hasn't finished developing yet. So when he gets that old man strength, he's going to be a badass. You could probably say, other than the Italy game, we were competitive in every game. All right, Ireland was more holding on, and France, we were competitive and then we got blown away. Fair enough. But you could definitely argue that Scotland game we should have won. If we hadn't been so poor in the first half, then we would have not had such a big gap to try and make up, and there was a good chance we could have won, and we probably should have won that game. If that game goes on for another 5-10 minutes, I think we might have nicked the result. And the England game is the same, really. We probably should have won that game. I just think maybe the physicality again let us down, and just the not being used to winning and closing games out. This Welsh team hasn't won many games for a long time now. I think it's something like 12 out of the last 13 Six Nations games has been a loss. So that just breeds negativity and losses. And then when you just look at the regions, not many wins coming out of the regions. The Ospreys are the only one who've really been competitive, and because they've had so many injuries, there wasn't an awful lot of Ospreys players in the team. So had we had more of a winning team or with winning players, you'd think we probably would have won at least 2 games. And then if we'd have won Scotland and England to start the Six Nations, who knows what we would have gone on to do. I don't think we would have won the tournament, don't get me wrong. But so when you look at it in the cold light of day, yes, it's very, very disappointing. But there is some causes to be excited and be positive with some of the players who've performed and had opportunities. Also, there was an interesting interview on the Scrum 5 podcast with David Buttress, who's the big dog at the Dragons, and he's been involved in Welsh Rugby, the PRB, for a long time, and he's basically, from what his insider knowledge is, he thinks that there is going to be big change. Now, it doesn't really serve him to lie because he's part of the regional setup, so he's not in the WRU per se, where he's just trying to give a politician's answer. But he thinks with the new governance, Abby Turney in charge, and the new board and stuff like that, he thinks that there is going to be a change in how things work. Gatland has mentioned that they're trying to align things more now and put the structures in place. Nigel Walker has mentioned this as well. Alright, admittedly, as Welsh fans, we've heard these things many times before in the past about things are going to change, it's going to be different, we're doing a review, but I think it seems like they've managed to get rid of a lot of the old deadwood who are just taking the money and not actually doing a job. And if that is the case, then it's still going to be a few years of pain, don't get me wrong, but at least we're course correcting. Another thing he mentioned, this is also something that Squidge brought up on a recent video, it's worth checking out. He brought up the funding and he compared it the same to Squidge as the Irish Rugby Board. Now, what Squidge compared it to was the amount of profit that the Irish Board make and what they put back specifically into players, and it was something like 50%, and the WRU was around the 25% mark, which is obviously nowhere near good enough, and it shows on the pitch. But David Buttress made a different comp, but in the same ballpark. He said he compared it to, basically, he called it rugby and he used it as a blanket term. So the Irish put 90% of the profit they make back into rugby, and then the other 10% goes to everything else that you need to run the organisation. So rugby was grassroots all the way to the top, and he said the WRU is about 50 to 60%, and then the rest goes to different things. He used the WRU's hotel as an example, and money just seems to go into the ether when it comes to the WRU, which is concerning. So he also made the point that they can put their hands on some of this extra money. So he was saying, obviously, it's their money, so they can take it from other places and put it wherever they see fit. So if we can increase this amount from 60% to 80 and 9 to 90, maybe, I don't see that happening, but anywhere near the 80 to 90% mark, that gives us a much, much better funded game in Wales. He also said that there was a bit of good news that it seems as though instead of the regional budget decreasing this year, which is what we were expecting, again, after it decreased last year, it's actually going to rise back up ever so slightly. Now, he said it's not going to be a substantial amount per region, but it is an increase rather than a decrease. So rather than looking at the regions, we're going to have to try and save more money from where they already are strapped for cash, that we're actually going to be in a position where they can at least hold where they are and hopefully increase things. So yeah, there's a lot of positivity, really. I mean, if what he's saying actually comes to fruition, we've had, like we said, lots of reviews and it's been lots of talk and this and that, but it really does seem like the mood music at the moment and the new structure and the new governance, I think they've come to a fact where they realise, hopefully, that what's going on is currently unsustainable. And at the end of the day, if they continue to run it the way they do, they'll all be out of jobs anyway, so they've got no choice rather than to course correct and hopefully return us back to being competitive with the top nations. So there you are. It might not necessarily be as bad as we think. Also, the under-20s went from 0 wins to 2 wins this Six Nations, which obviously is still not brilliant, but it's way better than 0. So it seems as though they're starting to sort things out below as well, because obviously a lot of those younger players are being forced into regional games, which is good, which is giving them the experience, and it's making them more competitive at under-20s level. They're bringing in this new elite player competition thing, which hopefully will improve things for the younger guys as well. So they are making an attempt to improve the pathways, and it's going to be a few years of pain, I think, but we are hopefully heading in the right direction. Also, one bit of news, just put it in the link below. I've got a Patreon if you want to check that out. Just want to thank all of the subscribers and every new subscriber that I've had over this Six Nations. It's been awesome interacting with you in the comments, and keep subscribed because I've got something different coming to the channel that I've been working on in the background, and I'll hopefully get that out in the next couple of weeks to you. So stay subscribed, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.